Amanda and Emu grew up in completely different worlds, never crossed paths, and did not know each other until one day their parents decided to combine their lives. Amanda's mother, Margaret, and Emu's father, Robert, met at a book lovers club. They were united by their love of literature and long discussions on this topic. They often disappeared at literary evenings and exhibitions, discussing the work of their favorite writers and poets, and soon deeper feelings arose between them. It was unexpected, but it soon became obvious to both of them that they wanted to be together. For Amanda, the news of her mother's upcoming wedding was a complete surprise. It always seemed to her that after her father's death, her mother would not start a new relationship. Moreover, Amanda was absorbed in her studies and hardly noticed her mother's personal life. When Margaret announced her engagement to Robert, Amanda felt the full range of emotions from surprise to hidden anxiety. She didn't know how to react or what to expect from such a turn of events. Emu, in turn, was no less surprised to learn that his father had decided to get married. After his parents divorced, he lived with his mother for a long time and saw his father only on weekends. Robert didn't seem interested in a new marriage, preferring to spend time with his son and work on his projects. But life has made its own adjustments. Emu respected his father's choice, but he couldn't get rid of the feeling that this wedding would completely change his usual way of life. The wedding took place in a small, cozy restaurant where close friends and relatives gathered. For Amanda, this was the first time she met Emu, a stepbrother, whose existence she had only known until now from her mother's stories. He seemed withdrawn and unfriendly to her. He kept to himself all the time, spoke little, and looked at her suspiciously. Amanda tried to figure out how he was taking all these changes in their lives, but her attempts to start a conversation were met with cold indifference.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I know the situation is a bit strange, but maybe we should get to know each other better.
Hello. Yes, it's a strange situation. I don't think we need to change anything. We're just guests at this celebration of our parents' lives.
Amanda was confused by this answer, but decided not to insist. She understood that it was not easy for him to accept all the changes either, and decided to give him time. However, the first impressions were not the best. After the wedding, they had to face the reality of a new life under the same roof. Margaret and Robert bought a small house in the suburbs to start their life together and planned for the children to live with them too. It was unexpected and uncomfortable for Amanda and Emu. They were both used to their space and independence, and the prospect of sharing a house with an almost unknown person bothered them. From the first days of living together, disagreements began to arise. Amanda loved order and cleanliness, and Emu preferred creative disorder, justifying this with his passion for art. His room was filled with canvases, paints and papers that were scattered all over the floor. Amanda tried to be tolerant, but sometimes she couldn't resist making comments.
Emu, could you at least clean up your room a little? There are too many things scattered around.
This is my way of working, Amanda. I need space to be inspired. And you don't come in here, and there won't be any problems.
Her insistence irritated Emu, and his response further convinced Amanda that their living together would not be easy. She began to avoid him, trying to spend more time in her room or in the library, where she could immerse herself in her studies and take some time away from the tense atmosphere at home. But it was impossible to avoid each other, because the house was not that big, and common responsibilities such as cleaning, cooking and gardening forced them to interact. Robert and Margaret, wanting their children to get closer, distributed responsibilities so that Amanda and Emu spent time together as often as possible. This decision was a real test for them. One of those moments was the day they had to put the garden in order together. Amanda loved spending time outdoors and enjoying the peace and quiet that gardening brought. Emu, on the contrary, considered it a waste of time. However, under pressure from their parents, they still started work. Initially, there was silence between them. Both worked in silence, lost in their own thoughts and clearly not trying to start a conversation. Amanda decided that the silence was getting too depressing and tried to start a conversation.
I know you're not happy about all this, but maybe we can try to find a common language.
A common language? We are so different. You like order, I prefer chaos. What should we talk about?
Amanda sighed, realizing that her attempts had failed again. But at that moment, an idea came to her. she suggested making the garden more creative, adding new plants, making several flower arrangements that would reflect their different tastes. To her surprise, Imuyu became interested in the idea. Gardening suddenly turned into something more than just doing chores. They began to discuss which flowers should be planted better, how to make the compositions more original. Amanda suggested planting flowers that she remembered from childhood, and Imuyu suggested adding shrubs and trees that would create shady corners for creativity and reflection. Gradually, their conversations became more friendly and relaxed. This joint activity was the first step towards rapprochement for them. They began to realize that they could find common ground and work together if they tried. In the garden, they began to share their thoughts and feelings, discussing not only plants, but also their hobbies and dreams. Amanda told him about her desire to become a doctor, and he shared his plans for the future in art. Every day they became more open with each other. Their shared responsibilities have become an opportunity for them to get to know each other better and understand that there is a lot in common behind their differences. They began to appreciate qualities that had previously annoyed them. Amanda began to admire Imuyu's creative approach, and he appreciated her organization and ability to plan. Amanda and Imuyu gradually began to get used to living with each other. They realized that their initial ideas about each other were superficial, and that they actually had much more in common than they thought. They began to appreciate their time together, to find joy and pleasure in it. And although their relationship was still full of misunderstandings and small conflicts, they realized that they were ready to work on them. They began to learn how to negotiate and look for compromises, instead of immediately entering into conflict. Amanda tried not to make comments about the mess, and Imuyu, in turn, began to take more responsibility for joint responsibilities. As time passed, their distrust and suspicion began to dissipate. They began to see each other not only as stepbrothers and sisters, but also as friends who can support each other in difficult times. They realized that their lives were now connected, and that they had to work together to make it better. This unexpected rapprochement was the beginning of a new stage in their lives for them. They began to realize that their relationship is not just a duty imposed by their parents, but an opportunity to learn new things and discover new facets of each other. Amanda and Imuyu began to realize that perhaps fate had brought them together for a reason, and that there were many more amazing discoveries ahead of them. After the first weeks of a stressful life together, Amanda and Imuyu began to notice that the situation was not as hopeless as they had thought at the beginning. Gradually, through a series of family activities and daily chores, they began to find moments that allowed them to see each other from a different perspective. It's been a few weeks since their parents' wedding, and Amanda and Imuyu have already gotten used to their new lifestyle. At first, they spent time together only because of the need to do common household chores and participate in family dinners. However, now these obligatory meetings have begun to take on something more for them. They notice that they sometimes look forward to spending time together. One evening, Margaret and Robert decided to have a family dinner to celebrate the first weeks of their life together. Several close family friends were invited to dinner. Amanda and Imuyu were assigned to prepare dessert together. At first, they took it as another unpleasant duty, but in the process of cooking, the situation began to change. In the kitchen, Amanda and Imuyu began to work together, marveling at how well they complemented each other. Amanda was responsible for following the recipe, and Imuyu was responsible for creativity and improvisation. When Amanda suggested making a traditional apple pie, Imuyu suggested adding a little cinnamon and vanilla to it to give the dish a new flavor. Amanda, skeptical at first, agreed to try.
Okay, let's try your idea. But if the pie doesn't work out, it will be on your conscience.
I agree. But I'm sure it will be great. A little imagination has never hurt anyone.
They enjoyed laughing and joking as they cooked. During the cooking process, they began to tell each other stories from their childhood, sharing the memories that made them who they became. When the dessert was ready, Amanda and Imuyu proudly carried it to the table. All the guests were delighted with the unusual taste of the pie, and it made Amanda and Imuyu feel proud. They exchanged smiles, realizing that together they had really managed to do something good. This simple situation in the kitchen was the first step for them to realize that they could be not just stepbrothers and sisters forced to share the same roof over their heads, but also good friends. Subsequently, they began to communicate more and look for reasons to spend time together. One of these reasons was their shared interest in music. One evening, when Margaret and Robert went to visit friends, Amanda heard Emu playing guitar in her room. It wasn't loud, but it was a very melodious and sensual sound. Interested, she went to the door of his room and knocked.
Can I come in?
Emu, a little surprised by her request, replied.
Yes, of course.
Amanda came in and sat on the edge of his bed, listening intently as he continued to play. She was amazed by his skill and how the music seemed to come from his very soul.
You play amazing. Why didn't you ever say you could do that?
I'm just playing for myself. Music is a way to express what I can't say in words.
Amanda nodded, realizing that there was a deep feeling behind his words. She felt that this could become another common theme for them, another bridge connecting their different worlds. The next day, Amanda invited him to go to a concert with a local band, which she learned about from her friends. Emu reluctantly agreed at first, but after a few minutes their discussion of music turned into a lively and fascinating conversation. They shared their favorite songs and bands, talked about which concerts they had attended, and how it had affected their perception of music. These conversations about music led them to discuss other topics. They started talking more about their dreams and ambitions. Amanda told him about how she dreams of going to medical university and becoming a doctor to help people. Her eyes lit up when she talked about her dream, and Emu couldn't help but notice her sincere desire to do good. Emu, in turn, shared his plans for the future in art. He talked about how he dreams of creating his own exhibition where he can show his work to the world. His passion for art was evident in every word, and Amanda was amazed by the depth of his ideas and the way he perceives the world. Every day they found more and more topics to talk about and more reasons to spend time together. They began to go out for walks around the city together, discussing everything that surrounded them from the architecture of old houses to street musicians. These moments allowed them to see each other from the other side, to begin to notice in the other those qualities that had previously been hidden behind a wall of distrust. Emu, who initially seemed withdrawn and unfriendly to Amanda, opened up to her as a man with a deep soul and a subtle sense of humor. He was able to find funny things in the most unexpected situations, and his smile gradually began to warm her heart. Amanda, in turn, stopped being just a diligent student and a decent daughter for Emu. He saw in her a brave and determined girl who is not afraid to express her thoughts and feelings. One evening, when they were walking in the park, Amanda suddenly stopped and, looking at the starry sky, said,
You know, Emu, I think life sometimes throws us amazing surprises. For example, I would never have thought that I would be able to find a friend like you.
Emu was surprised by her words, but felt a pleasant warmth in his chest. He realized that he, too, was beginning to be overwhelmed by unexpected feelings. He enjoyed spending time with Amanda, listening to her thoughts and sharing his own. He began to realize that their relationship had become more than just a forced neighborhood.
Yes, you're right. I am also glad that we have begun to understand each other better.
These words were simple, but they meant a lot to both of them. They felt that something new and unexpected was emerging between them, something that went beyond simple friendship. They began to appreciate every moment they spent together and felt that their bond was getting stronger. Gradually, they began to find joy in everyday activities that previously seemed routine. For example, morning breakfasts have become a time for them to discuss and plan the day. They cooked food together, discussed the news, and shared their thoughts. It was a time they were looking forward to because they knew they could spend it together. Amanda and Emu also began to pay attention to doing small but meaningful things for each other. Amanda, having learned that Im liked one of the rare books that he had long wanted to read, gave it to him for his birthday. Emu, in turn, once painted a portrait of Amanda, which depicted her smiling the way he saw her every day. These little gestures and actions helped them to get even closer. They began to realize that they were starting to care about each other more than they expected. Their relationship moved to a new level, and they began to realize that there could be more between them than just friendship. Over time, Amanda and Emu began to spend more and more time together, and this time became more and more significant for both of them. They began to realize that their feelings for each other were beginning to change, that there was more between them than just sympathy. It was a strange and unexpected feeling, but they both began to realize that they could no longer deny what was happening between them. They didn't talk about it out loud, but everyone understood that their relationship was beginning to go beyond simple friendship. There was something new in their eyes as they looked at each other, and both knew that that look said more than any words. After Amanda and Emu started spending more time together, their relationship began to transform. They stopped being just stepbrothers and sisters who were forced to live under the same roof after their parents' wedding. Instead, they began to find something important and valuable in each other's support and understanding. At first, they both felt lost in the new circumstances. Amanda is used to living with her mother, and Emu is used to living with her father. The merging of their families led to a lot of changes that were difficult for both of them to adapt to. They felt out of place, faced with new rules and responsibilities, and each of them tried to find a way to cope with these changes. Amanda, always restrained and organized, tried to keep control of the situation as best she could. She was used to loneliness and silence when her mother was at work, and she was doing her own business or studying. Now she had to put up with the presence of another person in the house, who was also used to his own ways. Emu was her exact opposite. Spontaneous and freedom-loving, he often felt that the new state of affairs limited his freedom. He longed for a time when he could go about his business unhindered and was not forced to share space with someone else. The first weeks of their life together were filled with misunderstanding and hidden tension. Amanda often tried to talk to Emu about how to better organize their shared space and responsibilities, but her ideas were met with only indifference or brief answers. It seemed to her that he did not want to take her seriously or consider her opinion. On the other hand, Emu perceived her constant suggestions as attempts to control him and impose her rules on him. He was annoyed that he was being forced to adjust to a new way of life, and believed that Amanda was trying to limit his freedom. However, gradually they began to notice that they had much more in common than they thought. One evening, when their parents were at dinner with friends, Amanda and Emu were alone at home. Amanda, feeling lonely and a little lost, decided to go out on the veranda and get some fresh air. To her surprise, Emu was already sitting there, staring at the stars and clearly lost in thought. Amanda sat down next to her, and they were silent for a while. There was an unspoken tension in the air, but at the same time, each other's presence brought them some comfort. Finally, Amanda started talking. She talked about how difficult it is for her to get used to new circumstances, how she misses her old life, when everything was simpler and more familiar. She shared her fears about the future and what worries her. This confession was a big step for her. She rarely opened up to anyone, especially to Emu, with whom she had never had a close relationship before. Emu was listening to her attentively, and it was evident from his look. He understood her feelings because he had experienced something similar himself. After a pause, he began to talk about his experiences, about how difficult it is for him to adapt to a new life, how he misses his old home and his old routine. He talked about how he felt out of place, and that it was hard for him to find common ground with Amanda and her mother. These revelations were the first step towards mutual understanding for them. They realized that their problems and experiences were similar in many ways, and that they were both in the same boat. Amanda and Emu began to talk more about their feelings and how difficult it is for them to get used to a new lifestyle. These conversations helped them to understand each other better and feel that they were not alone in their experiences. Over time, they began to share not only their problems, but also their joys. Amanda told him about her hobbies and how she likes to spend time reading and writing short stories. Emu, in turn, shared his creative projects and plans for the future in the field of art. They began to find common topics of conversation and hobbies that united them. Their friendship began to grow stronger. They began to support each other in difficult moments and find solace in communication. Amanda, seeing how Emu was trying to sort out his feelings and understand her, began to trust him more. She realized that he was not just an annoying teenager who was trying to do things his own way, but a man who was also going through a difficult period in his life and needed support. Emu also began to see in Amanda not just a girl who wants to control everything and everyone, but a person who is sincerely trying to establish a relationship and make their life together more comfortable. He appreciated her attempts to understand him and help him adapt to new conditions. Gradually, they began to respect each other's views and find common ground. Their friendship was their salvation during this difficult period. They started spending more time together, discussing their plans for the future and sharing their dreams. These conversations became a source of inspiration and support for them. They began to see each other not just as stepbrothers, but also as friends who can support each other in any situation. They began to trust each other with their innermost secrets. Amanda told him about her childhood fears and worries, about how it was always difficult for her to trust people and open up to them. She talked about her dreams and how she was afraid they would never come true. Imu, in turn, shared his feelings about how he feels lost and does not know which path to choose in life. He spoke about his fears of the future and how he was afraid of not meeting his father's expectations. These frank conversations brought them even closer together. They realized that they could trust each other and that their friendship had become something deeper and more meaningful. They began to feel that they could be themselves in each other's presence without fear of condemnation or misunderstanding. Over time, they began to help each other cope with difficulties and find solutions to their problems. Amanda supported Ima when he felt depressed or confused and helped him find the strength to move forward. Imu, in turn, became a source of inspiration and support for Amanda when it was difficult for her or when she doubted her abilities. Their friendship has become a pillar of support for them during this difficult time. They began to realize that they could cope with any difficulties if they supported each other. They have learned to find solace in communication and in being there for them in difficult moments. Amanda and Imu became even closer. They began to find joy in helping each other and supporting each other in any situation. Their friendship has become for them not just a way to cope with difficulties, but also a source of joy and happiness. They began to realize that their relationship had become more than just a half-brother and sister. It was a true friendship based on trust, understanding, and mutual support. Gradually, their friendship became even deeper. They began to spend more time together, finding solace and joy in it. They have learned to trust each other with their feelings and thoughts, without fear of being misunderstood or judged. Their friendship became a source of strength and inspiration for them, and they began to realize that they could cope with any difficulties if they supported each other. They became a support for each other in difficult moments. Amanda helped Imu deal with his fears and doubts, and Imu supported Amanda when she felt lonely or confused. Their friendship has become a real salvation for them in this difficult time. Every day they got closer and closer, and their friendship grew stronger. They began to realize that they could be themselves in each other's presence, and that their relationship had become something deeper and more meaningful than just stepbrothers. They began to see each other as real friends who can support each other in any situation. Amanda and Imu have learned to find solace in communication and in being there for them in difficult moments. Their friendship became a source of strength and inspiration for them, and they began to realize that they could cope with any difficulties if they supported each other. They became even closer to each other, and their relationship became more than just a half-brother and sister. It was a true friendship based on trust, understanding, and mutual support. Their friendship has become for them not just a way to cope with difficulties, but also a source of joy and happiness. They began to find joy in helping each other and supporting each other in any situation. Amanda and Imu became even closer, and their friendship became a real salvation for them during this difficult time. After many months of strengthening friendship between Amanda and Imu, their relationship began to gradually change. What began as a forced coexistence and unexpected rapprochement began to turn into something deeper and more complex. Amanda and Imu increasingly noticed that there was something between them that they could not explain in simple words. The first change happened imperceptibly. Amanda began to notice small details that had previously escaped her attention. She began to see how deftly and neatly Imu cooks, how attentively he listens when she speaks, how his eyes begin to shine when he talks about his paintings or dreams. Her attention to him became more intense than she would like to admit to herself. She noticed how her heart began to beat faster when he was around, and how her mood lifted just by his presence. Amanda tried to ignore it. She told herself that it was just sympathy and gratitude that he had become her friend in a difficult time. But these thoughts could not explain the inner tremor that arose in her whenever Imu accidentally touched her hand or when their eyes met. She could feel her cheeks starting to burn, and she tried to turn away so that he wouldn't notice. Imu, in turn, also began to notice changes in himself. He began to notice that Amanda had become more than just a stepsister to him. He began to find in her presence a special comfort and joy that he had not experienced before. His thoughts kept returning to Amada more and more often, even when he was busy with his own business. He loved watching her smile, how excitedly she talked about her dreams of becoming a doctor, how her eyes lit up when she talked about what she cared about. These new feelings began to bother him. He knew he shouldn't feel for her the way he had started to feel. She was his stepsister, and such feelings seemed wrong to him. But every time he tried to push those thoughts away, they came back with renewed vigor. He began to realize that he could no longer ignore what was going on in his heart. Mutual feelings began to become noticeable in their behavior towards each other. They began to avoid long looks and casual touches, but at the same time they couldn't resist spending as much time together as possible. They started reaching out to each other without even realizing it. Amanda noticed that she liked the way Emu found time for her to talk or help with her affairs. She was pleased that he was always there when she needed support or advice. She began to find excuses to spend more time with him. When he came home from work or after a walk, her heart began to beat faster, and she found herself waiting for these moments. Emu, in turn, also began to notice that he was attracted to Amada. He enjoyed spending time with her, listening to her stories and sharing his thoughts. He felt calmer and more confident in her presence. It bothered him that he began to perceive her not just as a sister, but as someone who became closer to him than he expected. He tried to keep his distance, but every time they were close, his feelings grew stronger. Their internal conflict intensified. On the one hand, they both understood that their feelings went beyond the ordinary friendship, but on the other hand, they were afraid to admit it, considering such thoughts wrong and dangerous. They were afraid that if they confessed their feelings to themselves, everything would change and they would lose the intimacy they had. This uncertainty began to affect their communication. They became more careful in their words and actions, afraid to say something superfluous or do something that might betray their true feelings. More and more often, Amanda found herself thinking over every word before saying it to him. She was afraid that one careless word could destroy what they had built. Emu, in turn, became more withdrawn and cautious. He tried to keep his distance so as not to let his feelings get out. But the more they tried to hide their feelings, the more obvious they became to both of them. They began to feel tension when they were together, and at the same time they felt that they could not be away from each other. They began to realize that their friendship had turned into something deeper and more meaningful than they could have imagined. Amanda often thought about how her life had changed since she met Emu. She remembered how at first she found him annoying and unnecessary in her life, and now she couldn't imagine a day without his presence. She began to wonder how it happened and why her feelings for him had changed so much. She was confused by the fact that she began to see in him not just a friend, but also a person with whom she would like to be around forever. Emu was also in turmoil. He remembered how at first he thought she was just another obstacle on his way to freedom, and now he couldn't imagine his life without her. He began to realize that his feelings for Amada had become deeper than just sympathy. He couldn't figure out how it happened and why his heart starts beating faster every time he thinks about her. These new feelings scared them both. They understood that their relationship went beyond what was accepted in society, and they were afraid that if they confessed their feelings, it could destroy their friendship and everything they had built together. They were afraid that they might lose each other if they went down this path. Amanda and Emu began to avoid situations that could lead to open confessions. They tried to spend less time alone, but their attempts to keep their distance only made their feelings even more obvious. They began to realize that despite their best efforts, they could no longer ignore what was going on between them. At one of these moments, Amanda, walking alone in the garden, caught herself thinking that she could not imagine her life without Emu. She began to realize that her feelings for him had become deeper than she had expected. She was afraid to admit it to herself, but she knew that her heart wasn't lying. She began to wonder what to do with these feelings and how to further build her relationship with Emu. Emu also experienced something similar. He often went for walks to be alone with himself and think about his feelings. He knew that he could no longer ignore what was going on in his heart. He began to wonder what to do with these feelings and what to do next. He was afraid that if he confessed his feelings, everything would change and they would lose what they had. They both began to realize that they couldn't ignore their feelings anymore. They knew that their friendship had become more than just a friendship, and that they had to do something about it. They began to realize that their feelings had become deeper and stronger than they could have imagined. Amanda and Emu were at a crossroads. They knew that their feelings were wrong from the point of view of society, but at the same time they could no longer ignore them. They began to realize that their friendship had turned into something more, and that they needed to decide how to build their relationship further. Every day their feelings became more and more obvious, and they began to realize that they could no longer hide them from each other. They knew they had to talk about it to figure out what to do next. But both were afraid of this conversation, afraid that it could change everything and jeopardize their friendship. Amanda and Emu faced a difficult choice. They had to decide what to do with their feelings and how to further build their relationship. They knew that this decision would change their lives forever, and they were afraid to take the first step. But they also knew that they could no longer ignore their feelings, and that they needed to do something to sort out what was going on between them. After months of internal struggle, Amanda and Emu realized that their feelings for each other were no longer a secret. It was no longer just friendship or affection. They both understood that something deeper and more meaningful had arisen between them. Each of them was worried about how it would affect their lives, their relationship with their parents, and their place in society. However, neither of them could deny anymore that their hearts yearned for each other. The moment has come when all these feelings and doubts have reached their climax. One evening, after dinner, they were alone in the living room. Their parents went to the theatre, leaving the two of them at home. It was already getting dark outside, and the only light source was a lamp on the bedside table. The atmosphere in the room was quiet and tense, filled with the words they were afraid to utter. Amanda could feel her heart beating in her chest as she sat across from Emu on the couch. She tried to focus on the books scattered on the table, but her mind was only on him. She tried to figure out how to say what she had wanted to say for a long time, but the words stuck in her throat. Emu sat across from her, trying not to look at her, but his gaze kept returning to her. He also felt this tense atmosphere, knowing that something had changed between them, and was afraid to make the first move. Their conversation began with the usual conversations about how the day went, what plans for the weekend. But every word seemed to be imbued with a hidden meaning that they both understood. Finally, Amanda felt like she couldn't hold it back anymore. She realized that if she didn't say it now, she might never find the strength to do it. She took a deep breath and resolutely looked up at Emu. Her words were cautious and nervous, but at the same time full of determination. She started talking about her feelings, how long ago she began to notice that she was thinking about him more than just a friend. She told how her heart beat faster whenever he was around, how she began to worry and be embarrassed at the very sight of him. She was afraid that her words might ruin everything, but she felt she had to be honest. Emu listened attentively to her, feeling his own heart begin to beat faster. He didn't expect her to be the first to talk about it, but her confession gave him the strength to confess his own feelings. He talked about how long ago he began to feel something more for her, how his thoughts constantly returned to her, how he tried to fight these feelings, considering them wrong, but eventually realized that he could no longer deny it. There was a long silence after their confessions. They both sat there, realizing what had just happened. Only their breathing could be heard in the room, and it seemed that time had stopped. They understood that this moment would change everything, and they were ready to accept it. Gradually, the silence began to fill with emotions. They both felt relieved that they had finally opened up to each other. Now that everything was said out loud, they could just be themselves without hiding their feelings. Their hearts finally found a common language, and it filled them with a sense of peace and joy. Their gazes met, and at that moment they felt that there were no more barriers between them. It was the moment when everything became clear their love is not just a fleeting infatuation, but something much deeper and more meaningful. They realized that they could no longer ignore their feelings and that they needed to move on together, despite all possible obstacles. Amanda and Emu sat side by side for a long time, considering their next steps. They understood that their decision to start an affair would not be easy. They knew that they would face condemnation from society and perhaps even from their parents. They understood that difficulties awaited them, but at the same time they realized that their love was worth all possible trials. The first days of their relationship were full of joy and excitement. They felt like they were in a fairy tale, where every day brings new discoveries and joys. They enjoyed every moment they spent together, realizing that their feelings had become even deeper and stronger. However, they soon had to face the first difficulties. They understood that they could not hide their relationship forever, and that sooner or later they would have to tell their parents. This step seemed to them the most difficult. They didn't know how their parents would react to the news that their children were in love with each other. Amanda and Emu decided that they needed to be honest and open, despite the fear of possible condemnation. They understood that the truth is always better than a lie, and that they must be prepared for any outcome. The important thing was that they were together, and that their feelings were sincere. When the day came, they gathered their parents and told them about their feelings. It was not easy, and each of them was afraid that they would not be understood. The parents were stunned and at first did not know how to react. It took them a while to realize and accept that their children had decided to go their own way. The public reaction was also mixed. Some neighbors and family friends were shocked by this news, while others showed understanding and support. Amanda and Emu understood that their relationship would cause a lot of discussion and perhaps even condemnation. But they were ready to fight for their love, no matter what. Their relationship grew stronger every day. They learned to support each other in difficult moments, discuss their fears and doubts, and find solace in their feelings. Their love grew deeper and deeper, and they realized that they were ready to go through any trials in order to be together. Amanda and Emu began planning their future, discussing how they would build their lives and how to cope with the challenges that awaited them. They understood that a difficult path awaited them, but at the same time they were confident that they would be able to overcome any difficulties if they were together. They began their life together with a new understanding and confidence that their love is worth all the effort. They supported each other in everything, helped to cope with difficulties, and enjoyed every day spent together. Their love became a source of strength and inspiration for them, and they knew that they could overcome everything if they were together. They soon began to notice that their relationship had become an inspiration and an example for others. Their friends and acquaintances saw how they supported each other, and this helped them to better understand their own relationships and appreciate the importance of honesty and openness in love. Amanda and Emu continued to live their lives, make plans for the future, and enjoy every day spent together. They knew that their love was something special, and they were ready to do everything to keep it. They realized that their feelings are not just a fleeting infatuation, but a deep and meaningful feeling that is worth all possible trials. They have started a new stage in their lives, full of joy and happiness, but also challenges and difficulties. But they were sure of one thing: their love is worth all the effort, and they are ready to fight for it, no matter what. They knew that many more trials awaited them, but also a lot of joy and happiness, and they were ready to walk this path together, hand in hand, supporting each other in any situation. After Amanda and Emu confessed their feelings to each other and began a romantic relationship, they faced a new wave of difficulties. Their love could no longer remain a secret. It became the subject of discussion and condemnation from others. In the small town where they lived, rumors and gossip spread quickly. Their romance, which did not fit into the usual norms and expectations of society, instantly became a hot topic of conversation. At first, the rumors reached their closest friends and acquaintances. Some of them were shocked and did not know how to react to the news that the stepbrother and sister had entered into a romantic relationship. They couldn't understand how this was possible, and they thought it was wrong. Some of their friends began to distance themselves, feeling uncomfortable around Amanda and Emu. Some expressed their opinion directly, considering their relationship immoral and dangerous. Within the family, the situation was even more difficult. Margaret and Robert were stunned to learn that their children had started dating. It was a real blow to them. They didn't know how to handle this situation. Margaret, who has always sought to be a support for her daughter, felt confused and disappointed. She couldn't understand how Amanda could fall in love with her stepbrother, and she was afraid it would damage the family's reputation. Robert, in turn, was furious. He felt that his son had betrayed his trust and violated boundaries that should not have been crossed. He couldn't accept that Emu had fallen in love with Amanda and started a relationship with her. For him, it was a violation of all moral and family principles. He couldn't understand how his son could afford such a thing. These initial reactions were a real test for Amanda and Emu. They felt that their relationship was under attack from all sides. They began to notice that people were looking at them with condemnation and bewilderment, that their friends and family began to move away from them. They had to deal with criticism and disapproval, which was sometimes so strong that they wanted to give up everything and leave. But they understood that their feelings were more than just a passing infatuation, and they were ready to fight for their happiness. Amanda and Emu decided not to give up. They understood that their love went beyond the usual, and that they would have to face a lot of prejudice and condemnation. They decided that they would be together, despite all the difficulties and obstacles, and would defend their right to love. They began to look for ways to explain to their family and friends that their feelings were sincere and real. The first step was to communicate openly and honestly with their parents. Amanda and Emu understood that they needed to explain their feelings and try to convince their parents that their love was not something wrong or immoral. They decided to have a family dinner, where they planned to talk openly with their parents about how they feel and why they decided to be together. Margaret and Robert, although they were against the idea, nevertheless agreed to talk. They were ready to listen to their children, despite the fact that they could not accept their relationship. During dinner, the atmosphere was tense and awkward. Amanda and Emu tried to explain their feelings, to tell how they came to understand that their love is real and sincere. They talked about how long they struggled with themselves before deciding to take this step, and how much they cherish each other. The reaction of the parents was mixed. Margaret was on the verge of tears. She couldn't believe that her daughter had fallen in love with her stepbrother. She was afraid it would destroy their family and ruin their relationship forever. Robert, in turn, was angry and disappointed. He could not accept that his son had violated boundaries that, in his opinion, should never have been crossed. He believed that their relationship was wrong and dangerous. Despite all the arguments and attempts to explain their feelings, Amanda and Emu realized that their parents were not ready to accept their relationship yet. But they weren't going to give up. They decided that they would give their parents time to reflect on everything and, perhaps, eventually make their decision. They understood that it would be a long and difficult journey, but they were ready to go through it together. They also started working on explaining their relationship to friends and acquaintances. They understood that many people would condemn them, but still hoped that some would be able to understand their feelings and support them. They started talking openly about their feelings, explaining how they came to this, and why they decided to be together. They tried to show that their love is more than just a passing infatuation, and that they are ready to fight for their happiness. Over time, the situation began to change a little. Some of their friends and acquaintances began to realize that their feelings were sincere and real. They saw how Amanda and Emu support each other, how they take care of each other, and how their love helps them cope with difficulties. These friends began to support them and help them cope with the condemnation and criticism. Gradually, their surroundings began to get used to their relationship. People began to realize that Amanda and Emu were not going to give up, and that they were serious about being together. They saw that their love did not destroy the family, but rather strengthened it, and began to accept their relationship. Of course, there were those who could not understand and accept their love, but Amanda and Emu learned not to pay attention to it. Over time, their parents also began to change their attitude. Margaret, seeing how happy her daughter was with Emu, began to gradually accept their relationship. She realized that she couldn't change how her daughter felt, and decided to support her in her choice. Robert also began to relent. He saw that his son was serious in his intentions, and that his feelings for Amanda were real. He realized that, despite all the prejudices, their love has a right to exist. Amanda and Emu understood that fighting prejudice and condemnation is a long and difficult process, but they were ready to go through it together. They knew that many more difficulties awaited them, but they were confident that they could overcome them if they were together. Their love became a source of strength and inspiration for them, and they were ready to defend it, despite all obstacles. Their relationship became an example for others, showing that love can overcome any obstacles and that true feelings can overcome prejudices and stereotypes. They began to inspire other people to follow their hearts and not be afraid to be themselves, despite what others think. Over time, Amanda and Emu became even closer to each other. They have learned to support each other in any situation, to find solace and strength in their love. They realized that their feelings were not only a test for them, but also an opportunity to strengthen their relationship and become even stronger. Eventually, their family and loved ones began to understand and accept their feelings. They saw that Amanda and Emu's love is sincere and real, that it brings them joy and happiness. They realized that prejudices and stereotypes should not prevent people from being happy, and that everyone has the right to love, no matter how it looks from the outside. Amanda and Emu continued to live their lives, make plans for the future, and enjoy every day spent together. They knew that their love was something special, and they were ready to do everything to keep it. They realized that their feelings are not just a fleeting infatuation, but a deep and meaningful feeling that is worth all possible trials. They have started a new stage in their lives, full of joy and happiness, but also challenges and difficulties. But they were sure of one thing: their love is worth all the effort, and they are ready to fight for it, no matter what. They knew that many more trials awaited them, but also a lot of joy and happiness, and they were ready to walk this path together, hand in hand, supporting each other in any situation. In the end, their struggle against prejudice and condemnation bore fruit. They saw that their love became an example for others, inspiring people to follow their hearts and not be afraid to be themselves. Their story has shown that love can overcome any obstacles, and that true feelings will always find the way to happiness.